Strike Fighter is amongst the most versatile of modern combat aircraft. Part fighter, part bomber, these aircraft excel in both offensive and defensive air combat. This video ordnance program looks at recent developments in the world's strike fighters. The single-seat fighter aircraft has dominated air combat since the earliest days of air warfare. Although mainly intended for fighting other aircraft, the fighter has long been used in a dual role. Fitted with bombs or other types of weapons, the fighter can also attack ground targets. In this ground attack role, it has often been called a fighter-bomber or strike fighter. Today's strike fighters differ enormously in their configurations and capabilities. They range from relatively simple aircraft, often derived from trainers, to enormously complex attack aircraft, specially designed for the ground attack role. And there are many variations in between. Recent advances in aerospace technology have considerably enhanced these dual-role capabilities. A good example was the combat performance of the Hornet Navy strike fighter during Operation Desert Storm.
There was one remarkable incident. There were two F-18s going on a bombing run. And these airplanes have supposed dual capability. That is, they're supposed to be able to fire either against aircraft or against ground targets. And that's not easy because the radar for ground targets would normally be quite different than an air-to-air radar. But what they did was much more impressive than that. They're on this run. They're jumped suddenly by two MiGs. They break off from the bombing attack. They switch to air-to-air format. They shoot down the two MiGs. Then they resume the bombing. Now, in the past, typically, if you were a fighter bomber and you were jumped, you dropped your bombs and then fought. They didn't even have to drop their bombs. They kept the bombs on board, shot down the MiGs with missiles, and then resumed. That's quite a remarkable capability. That's something you would never have seen before. And I wouldn't attribute it just to the airplane, I'd attribute it to the computer system that goes with the airplane. A lot of what you saw in that war that was so impressive had to do with radical improvements in computer capability.
The configuration of modern strike fighters is shaped by their missions. Ground attack falls into several categories. Close air support generally means combat missions in the immediate battle area, close to friendly forces. In these missions, the aircraft are often assigned to attack enemy tanks or troop concentrations. Accuracy of delivery is a prime requirement in close air support to avoid causing casualties to friendly forces. Another important mission for strike fighters is called battlefield interdiction. In the interdiction role, the primary targets are military forces deep behind the battle line. This could include high-value targets such as command posts and headquarters, supply bases, vital bridges, enemy artillery positions, and reserve forces moving up to the front. The requirements for this deep attack mission are very different from the close air support mission. Since the attacks will be carried out deep behind enemy lines, the strike fighter must be able to survive the onslaught of enemy air defense systems, such as radar-directed missiles. Modern strike fighters often accomplish this by relying on low-flying tactics. This tactic takes advantage of terrain features to hide the strike fighter from the prying eyes of enemy radars. We will next take a look at several of today's strike fighters, each of them a very different type of aircraft from the other, tailored to very specific attack missions. The Harrier vertical takeoff jet is a nearly unique variety of strike fighter. The only other comparable jump jet is the Soviet Navy's Yak-38 Forger. The Harrier was developed in Britain to fulfill a very special requirement. In modern air wars, air bases are a prime target. If the runways can be put out of action, the high-performance jet fighters will be unable to take off and land. The Harrier avoids this problem with its vertical takeoff and landing features. It can take off like a conventional jet, and its Rolls-Royce engine is specially configured so that the exhaust can be vented downwards, enabling the Harrier to take off and land vertically. A Harrier can operate from small clearings near the battle area, regardless of the conditions of local runways. Falklands War in 1982 demonstrated the versatility of the Harrier.
Going back to the Falklands, without the Harrier there would have been no air power for the British Navy and for the British Air Force. So we use that also in the central region and in other places. We can operate away from airfields, away from long strips, either in the woods, on ships, on strips, on bit of tarmac roads near villages. You can use it anywhere.
The complexity of the engine arrangement on the Harrier means that the pilot has a larger array of controls in the cockpit than in more conventional fighter aircraft.
It is an extra lever, an extra throttle lever, which normally for forward flight, the nozzles are pointing aft, and when you want to slow down into the hover, you bring that lever back and the nozzles go down to the vertical, or to slow down even quicker forward of the vertical. And then as you slow down and the wing loses lift, then you have to replace that with engine power, so you bring up the engine to high power settings to compensate for that loss of lift. So in effect, when you're in the hover, you're sitting on a column of air from the engine.
In spite of the added complexity presented by the engine, the Harrier is popular with its flight crews due to its handling qualities.
I think it's a tremendous aircraft to fly because it's so unique. It's got the helicopter type qualities and the normal conventional aircraft qualities. You know, for instance, when you're flying around at 420 knots, 480 knots at low level, half an hour later you're hovering above a metal pad, and that is tremendous feeling, superb, and that I think is a big benefit from the pilot's point of view of the Harrier, really.
The primary mission of the RAF's Harrier GR5s is the ground attack mission, but the Falklands fighting made it clear that the Harrier can perform in the fighter role as well.
You find that we do a lot more air combat than even the air defence guys. They do radar combat, and we do a lot of aircraft-to-aircraft fighting. So a lot of our training is pure air combat. I'd imagine 40% of it. So whenever the weather is not good, or we've done a tremendous amount of low level, we go up and we do combat, and we do that as normal. And we're one of the very few ground attack aircraft that do it, simply because of the flexibility of the Harrier, as you say.
The United States Marine Corps has been a particularly enthusiastic supporter of the jump jet concept. The Marines currently fly the AV-8B Harrier, a second generation of the aircraft developed in cooperation between British Aerospace and McDonnell Douglas. The Marine pilots are as enthusiastic about its performance as their British counterparts.
Being a Harrier pilot is kind of special because I think we're the best pilots. We're the best stick and rudder men, I think, in military aviation, because it's the best of both worlds. I mean, you hover like a helicopter and you fly straight and level like a regular aircraft. So I enjoy the VSTOL part of the Harrier aviation community.
VSTOL, what is that?
Vertical short takeoff and landing.
The Harrier itself, what kind of aircraft is it to handle and fly?
Oh, it's like a little sports car. Handles very well. It's not supersonic like some of the other high-speed fighter aircraft, but it maneuvers very well, and it's very versatile as far as what you can do with the aircraft and basically where you can operate the aircraft from. And we only need a 2,000-foot aluminum strip to take off. And of course, you can land in the spot the size of a tennis court. So the fun thing about Harrier aviation is where you operate the aircraft from. And of course, it's state-of-the-art, so it's got a lot of nice weapon systems in it that make it easy on you.
The Marines' interest in the Harrier can be traced to their special role in America's armed forces. The Marines have traditionally been employed as an expeditionary force, able to carry out combat assignments thousands of miles from major bases. The Harrier fits into the Marine operations, since it can operate from small carriers, called amphibious assault ships in the U.S. Navy. And once the Marines have secured a beachhead, the Harriers provide close air support from the beachhead area itself. During the Gulf War in 1991, Harrier units were the primary source of close air support for Marine ground units. The Harriers were based at forward positions not far from the Kuwait border. During the opening phases of Desert Storm, the Harriers flew strike missions well into Kuwait, attacking storage facilities, artillery positions, and other types of targets. Although the Harrier is usually viewed as a close air support aircraft for direct support of Marine ground units, it proved capable of carrying out the deep attack missions as well. This was in large part due to important improvements incorporated in the newer AV-8B Harrier II. The current version of the Harrier has nearly twice the range of the earlier Harrier I. Once the ground war began, the Harrier switched missions and began providing close air support for Marine ground forces during the liberation of Kuwait. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, better known to its pilots as the Warthog, is one of the oddest-looking strike aircraft in the world. Projecting from its blunt nose is a 30mm cannon, specially designed to destroy armored vehicles. This weapon, the GAU-8 Gatling gun, fires 15-ounce depleted uranium projectiles at a rate of 70 per second. The A-10 was designed specifically to hunt and attack tanks. Fast strike fighters have a nearly impossible time dealing with tanks. Moving at hundreds of miles an hour, fast jets have a hard time finding relatively small targets such as tanks. And tanks are so heavily armored that they require a direct hit to destroy. The A-10, although large, is graceful and maneuverable at low altitudes in a manner not found in fast jets.
In my view, it's not a pretty airplane, as you can see, but the GAU-8 30mm gun, it's probably the best gun built that we could. That's what the airplane is built on. It was built around the gun to start with. It's highly protective. We have titanium around the cockpit to protect the pilot. It has dual control surfaces, everything back up. We had one land with no hydraulics, pretty well shot up, which I think they're going to show you. It can take a lot of damage, and it can still come back and maybe fight another day, or at least get the asset of the pilot back to the friendly side, which is real good.
It really isn't very pretty, is it?
No, sir. It doesn't fly real fast, but it's fun. It's a different type of mission than maybe the air-to-air guys have, and it's a different mindset and a different way of thinking when you fly the airplane.
The A-10's unique design came about in part as a result of the Vietnam War. During Vietnam, many expensive fighter bombers were shot down by small arms fire. The A-10 was designed to survive in the close attack environment against machine gun fire. The two large engines are separated from one another so that if one is knocked out by a missile or by gunfire, the other is likely to survive. The A-10 can continue flying on only one engine. The flight controls are redundant so that if one control is knocked out, another can usually take its place. And the pilot sits in an armored bathtub, protecting him from most ground fire. This became very clear in the Gulf War in 1991. This A-10 was hit on its right wing, yet it was able to make it back to its base in Saudi Arabia, even with one of its hydraulic lines blown away.
The A-10 was built to take a beating and keep on going, and this incident here was just to prove it, just to prove its worth. It could have gone with worse, it could have been a lot worse and it could have made it, but it was built for durability, and it's withstood some of the roughest hits around.
The A-10 has been the ugly duckling of the U.S. Air Force in more ways than one. Before the Gulf War, many in the Air Force wanted to retire it from service or relegate it to observation duties. They felt that its slow speed would make it vulnerable to enemy fighter aircraft. But over Kuwait, with Iraqi fighter opposition non-existent, the A-10 was ideal. The main threat was the Iraqi anti-aircraft fire, and no other strike aircraft is as well protected as the A-10. Its slow speed and high maneuverability made it ideally suited for pinpoint attacks on Iraqi tanks and other hardened targets. One of the tactics resurrected during the Gulf War was the use of a forward air control aircraft, such as the Marine OV-10s. They would hover over an area and pick out targets for the oncoming A-10s.
Having a forward air controller with binoculars there to confirm that and watch what we were doing really helped out. As I said, he was able to say, yeah, those are tanks in the revetments, versus us having to go down lower altitude to look before we shot. You don't want to shoot another tank that somebody else already had and wasted munition, so that worked out real well.
The A-10 can carry a wide variety of bombs, including both unguided and laser-guided bombs. During Desert Storm, a standard weapon of the A-10 was the Maverick missile. The Maverick missile could be launched miles away from its target, allowing the pilot to stay a safe distance from enemy anti-aircraft guns. As this test footage from before the war shows, the Maverick has a devastating effect on tanks. No one would call the A-10 a fighter plane, but it does carry Sidewinder missiles to defend itself from enemy fighters. During the Gulf War, an A-10 pilot did manage to engage and shoot down an enemy helicopter with his GAU-8 cannon.
Oh, it was just the right place at the right time for the A-10. Unfortunately, it was the wrong place and the wrong time for the helicopter. As I said, it's not the primary mission is air-to-air. It's the reason we carry air-to-air missiles are just for self-protection, and nobody's fired an AIM-9 air-to-air missile on an A-10 at another target. But as I said, the angle I was attacking the helicopter, I couldn't use AIM-9, so I had to end up using the 30mm gun.
Although the A-10 was intended for the close air support mission, it is fitted with a refueling receptacle on its nose. This allows it to be refueled in flight, as we see here being done by a KC-135 tanker. In a war against an opponent with a large fighter force, the A-10 would not be committed to deep attack missions. Yet in the skies over Iraq, with the Iraqi Air Force smashed on the ground, the A-10 could operate with relative impunity, having to worry only about the omnipresent threat of ground fire and enemy anti-aircraft missiles. In spite of its detractors, the A-10 emerged from Desert Storm as one of the sterling performers. The Tornado represents a very different approach to the strike mission than the Harrier or the Warthog. It is a deep strike aircraft intended to carry out the battlefield interdiction mission far behind the enemy lines. This requires a level of sophistication not found on the Harrier and Warthog. The Tornado was designed from the outset as a multi-purpose aircraft. There are two distinctly different versions of the Tornado. The Tornado F-3 is an air defense interceptor. It is designed solely for air combat, not for attacking ground targets. The other version is the Tornado GR-1, the strike fighter version, designed for the attack role. The GR-1 was actually the first version of the Tornado family to be built. It entered service with the Royal Air Force in 1982. The critical difference between both types is their radar. The Tornado F-3 uses a Fox Hunter radar, which is specially designed for finding enemy aircraft at long range and attacking them with air-to-air missiles. The Tornado GR-1's radar is a terrain-following ground attack type. It is designed to allow the Tornado to fly safely at very low altitudes, at speeds of over 500 miles an hour. The idea behind this tactic is that the Tornado can remain hidden from enemy anti-aircraft radars by exploiting terrain features. Ground-based radars are not very efficient at finding aircraft at low altitudes, since terrain features such as trees, hills, or even buildings can obstruct their view. The radar on the Tornado GR-1 can be set to a terrain-following mode which guides the aircraft over the ground at a predetermined height to avoid major obstructions. The Tornado is a multinational effort being built in Britain, Germany and Italy. The German armed forces employ it both in the Air Force and in the Navy. In Navy service, it can be used as a strike aircraft carrying bombs, or it can be fitted with specialized weapons, such as the Cormoran anti-ship missile. During the Gulf War, the Tornado GR-1 formed the backbone of the Royal Air Force's deep strike capability. The initial night missions of the GR-1s was to attack the Iraqi air bases using JP-233 anti-runway munitions. This was one of the most dangerous assignments in the January air assault, with the Tornado squadrons suffering several losses.
Initially we lost a few, but they were doing a slightly more difficult role in that flying in low level with less support aircraft, down where there's more anti-aircraft weaponry, guns and missile systems. We're now flying more out of the way of that, higher altitudes where they can't quite touch us, and with a lot more electronic and active support from the American specialist aircraft. So
one of the main roles of the Tornado is to deny the airfields using JP-233. I know they've actually achieved air supremacy, and a lot of the job has been done in that respect, so we move on to other targets.
With the runways rendered ineffective, the Tornadoes switched missions and munitions. Their targets were expanded to cover key installations deep in Iraq using conventional bombs. Because of the Tornado's sophisticated radar, targets could be attacked accurately even at night.
It's very much a 24-hour operation. Now, at the present time, most of the Tornado flying is taking place in the hours of darkness, but there's a lot of work to be done during the day to make sure that all the rectification on the aircraft is complete during the day, and of course we have to arm them up for the night missions. So we're just about split down the middle as far as manpower is concerned. Half are working through the day and the other half through the night, so it's continuous.
The munitions used against targets were tailored for the missions. Laser-guided bombs for pinpoint targets such as bridges, normal unguided bombs for most other targets.
It depends how accurate you need to be. There's a number of different delivery profiles that we can give it to put it onto a specific point on the ground. For targets that are area targets, we tend to just throw them in there and do as much damage as we can. But for specific points, obviously we can modify the profile and the amount of radar work that we do around the target to fine down that aiming point. So we're fairly confident we can put it just where we need it.
Bridges became a specialty of the Tornado force. In this footage, shot during a Tornado attack on an Iraqi bridge, the crosshairs mark where the laser designator is being pointed. The laser-guided bomb picks up the reflected energy from the laser and homes in on the bridge with remarkable precision. Besides the Royal Air Force squadrons, the Royal Saudi Air Force also flew the Tornado GR-1 as its principal strike aircraft during the war. As in the British case, when low-level missions were necessary, night operations were the rule. By this stage in the air war, the Iraqi radar defenses had been effectively blinded. At night, the best the Iraqis could do was to fire blindly into the air. These night attacks are long and arduous. The navigator, sitting in the rear of the aircraft, monitors the plane's flight path with the terrain-following radar, seen here. After a mission deep inside Iraq, the first sight of the lights of the home base's runway are always a welcome sight. The Royal Saudi Air Force took an active role in ground strikes against targets in Kuwait and Iraq, relying primarily on the Tornado GR-1 strike aircraft. No doubt the F-117 Black Jet is the most exotic of today's strike fighters. The F-117 is a first-generation stealth aircraft designed around the idea of reducing aircraft visibility to radar. The strike fighter's principal enemy is anti-aircraft weapons, and the most dangerous of these are radar-guided missiles and radar-directed guns. If the radars can be blinded, then the anti-aircraft fire can be rendered ineffective. The F-117 accomplishes this in two ways. It is a night attack aircraft with special sensors to allow the pilot to attack pinpoint targets on the darkest nights. And its unique shape and surface coatings make it nearly invisible to radar, except at very close ranges. During the Gulf War, the stealth fighter was the only aircraft entrusted to carry out pinpoint strike missions in the heart of Baghdad. Not a single stealth fighter was engaged or shot down by Iraqi forces. Not surprisingly, the F-117 pilots are confident of the performance of their aircraft. Colonel Al Whitley commanded the stealth strike fighters in the Gulf War and flew the first F-117 over Baghdad.
It's a fantastic airplane. And again, I think if you'll go back and look at past discussions about the F-117, I think the record stands for itself, and cost have never really been a subject of discussion with this airplane. It has certainly demonstrated its value, and price and value are two things not to be confused. They're not necessarily one and the same, but I think the events of the last few days have demonstrated the value of this airplane and the technology in general.
The F-117's principal weapon is the laser-guided bomb, carried in recessed bomb bays. The stealth features allow the F-117 to fly with near impunity at 10,000 feet, above the range of most anti-aircraft guns. The target here is an Iraqi air defense headquarters in downtown Baghdad. The war in the Gulf demonstrated the central role that air power plays in modern warfare. And at the sharp edge of the desert sword was the strike fighter.